Hi, welcome to Edfolio. Now we will be looking at the key concepts regarding the budget, and in these concepts we will be talking about the fiscal deficit, the revenue deficit, the effective revenue deficit and primary deficit. But more importantly, after these sessions, we would also look into how you can by yourself download this data from the RBI's website and plot these curves by yourself. As a problem, I have put it in this particular video, and I've also put the solution down there. So please try and attempt that particular exercise. Now, the first thing that we will observe is fiscal deficit. This is one of the prime numbers which is mentioned in each year's budget. Now, we had seen the definition of fiscal deficit. What is fiscal deficit? It is the borrowings of government of India. जो भी government हर साल borrow करती है, that figure is reflected in fiscal deficit, and it is also called as debt-making capital receipts. Now, in the budget, we had seen the debt-making capital receipts. These debt-making capital receipts is nothing but the fiscal deficit. तो जो भी government borrow कर रहा है from whatever source is called as the fiscal deficit. And we will read about FRBM, which mandates that हमारा जो fiscal deficit है वो ideally should be around 3%. We'll talk about FRBM and we'll talk about the trends in fiscal deficit very soon. So first definition is it is the borrowings of government of India, or you can say that it is debt making capital receipts, or there is another way. Ideally, at the end, what is that you will borrow? आप borrow कितना करोगे? Your total expenditures minus the total revenue. So what is your total expenditure? Your total expenditure is revenue expenditure plus capital expenditure. Now, if you subtract your revenue receipts, basically your tax receipts and non-tax receipts, and also you subtract non-debt making capital receipts, the sum of that equation will also be the borrowings that the government will have to do. So आप total expenditure में से revenue receipts minus कर लो and non-debt making capital receipts minus कर लो, तब भी आपके पास debt making capital receipts आ जाएगा as an entity, and which is also equal to the borrowings of government of India. Now, so we are clear that this is the borrowings of government of India. And now let's observe कि हमारा fiscal deficit कैसे move कर रहा है. Now, if you see before 2004 हमारा fiscal deficit around 6% चल रहा था इस period के अंदर. Then what happened was, in Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, a new legislation was passed. The name of that legislation was Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Under this act, the executive, the finance minister, to showcase that how it is reducing its borrowings. तो यहाँ पर mandate आना शुरू हो गया कि गवर्नमेंट को लॉन्ग टर्म के अंदर अपना फिस्कल डेफिसिट कंट्रोल करना है. Now, why is it important to control the fiscal deficit? It is important because suppose you have 100 rupees in the economy. Now, if the government comes into the market and borrows a significant amount of it, suppose government borrows 80 rupees from the market, only 20 rupees is left. Ab ye 20 rupees is demanded by everyone else. So therefore, if the amount of money left in the market is pretty small, then the demand for money demand will be more than money supply, and if money demand is more than money supply, उसका result क्या होगा? उसका result होगा कि rate of interest increase हो जाएगा. If rate of interest increases, then the impact is investment reduces. So ultimately, the impact of excess borrowing by government of India is crowding out. In Keynesian economics, you might have learned कि there is something called crowding out. इस phenomena की वजह से मार्केट में इन्वेस्टमेंट कम होता है, और इन्वेस्टमेंट कम होने की वजह से जीडीपी कम होगा. एंड अगर जीडीपी कम हुआ, देन उसका इम्पैक्ट क्या होगा कि मार्केट में आपने मनी पंप इन कर दिया है बट जीडीपी इतना ग्रो नहीं हो रहा है, योर डिमांड इज मोर देन द सप्लाई दैट इज बीइंग क्रिएटेड, और उसका इम्पैक्ट सीधा इन्फ्लेशन पे आएगा. So inflation starts increasing, apart from the fact that because of high rate of interest that will be passed on to the consumers as well. So overall उसका inflationary impact भी होगा and उसका investment पे भी negative impact होगा. Therefore the government needs to control the amount of fiscal deficit that it runs. And if you see, after passing of the FRBM, till 2007, the target was to achieve 3% of fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP, and we had achieved that. However, in wake of global financial crisis, now what happened was, because US के अंदर crisis आया and उसका domino effect India पे भी आना शुरू हो गया, we had to infuse, to revive the economy, we had to infuse the economy with a lot of fiscal stimulus. So गवर्नमेंट ने इस पीरियड में क्या किया, गवर्नमेंट ने टैक्सेस अपने कम कर दिए एंड एक्सपेंडिचर्स बढ़ा दिए. सो वंस द गवर्नमेंट स्टार्ट्स टू डू दिस, तो गवर्नमेंट का अपना रिसीट साइड कम कर लिया एंड एक्सपेंडिचर बढ़ा देगा, तो गवर्नमेंट का बोरोइंग्स बढ़ जाएंगी. एंड दैट इज एक्जैक्टली व्हाट वी सॉ इन दिस पीरियड, दैट द फिस्कल डेफिसिट स्टार्टेड शूटिंग अप, एंड दिस वाज कॉल्ड इन दिस पीरियड वाज मुखर्जी स्टिमुलस. It was called Mukherjee stimulus after finance minister Pranab Mukherjee. And then we saw over a period of time, we saw the consolidation of fiscal deficit again, which is called as fiscal consolidation. जब आप अपने deficits को control करने की कोशिश करते हो. So this is the period of fiscal consolidation. And again after 2018-19 we started to see an increase even in the pre-COVID time. Pre-COVID time में भी आपका 4.5% का आपका fiscal deficit था. It is because just before COVID, India was witnessing a slowdown because of both structural factors and cyclical factors. India was experiencing a slowdown, and उस slowdown के अंदर government of India started pumping in money into the economy, and therefore the borrowings increased and therefore fiscal deficit increased. And finally, then the next nail in the coffin of fiscal numbers was the COVID. And COVID की वजह से we see a huge jump in the fiscal numbers to 9.2% of GDP. And now we are seeing again a path of consolidation where the government has estimated that in year 2022-23, our budget estimates for fiscal deficit is 6.4%, and we are expected that by 2025-26 we'll be able to reach the 4.5% figure. So this was the phase, or this was how the fiscal numbers were behaving. Now I'll come to the exercise that you have to do on your own at the end of primary deficit numbers. Now let's see revenue deficit. If you see revenue deficit, what is it? Revenue deficit is revenue expenditures minus revenue receipts. तो एक तरीके से ये वो खर्चा है जो गवर्नमेंट रेकरिंग बेसिस पे कर रहे हैं, और ये आपकी रेकरिंग इनकम है. सो ट्राई टू इमेजिन अ हाउस होल्ड जो रेकरिंग बेसिस पे ज़्यादा खर्चा करता है और उसकी इनकम उतनी नहीं है. सो इफ दैट इज द केस, तो आप परपेचुअल डेट ट्रैप में फंस रहे हो. सो देयरफॉर आइडियली यू शुड हैव अ रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट एज क्लोज टू जीरो एज पॉसिबल, विच इज अ रेवेन्यू न्यूट्रल पोजिशन. एंड दिस इज वॉट एग्जैक्टली वी एम्ड फॉर. जब हमने FRBM साइन किया था, तो वी सेड दैट वी विल first reduce it to 1% and then slowly reduce it to revenue neutral position. And again it has a similar map where we actually were able to reduce it to somewhere around 1% in 2007-2008. But again, the same phenomena that happened with fiscal deficit is happening here ki global financial crisis की वजह से we started borrowing more, and then because of COVID we started borrowing more, and now we are trying to reduce the fiscal deficit. But there is a very interesting concept here. Now this concept here is that one of the ratios that an economist or as an economics person or an economic student you should watch out for is the ratio of fiscal revenue deficit to fiscal deficit. Now आप borrow कर रहे हो, that is not a problem. Suppose you are borrowing some money, say 1 lakh rupees. If you borrow this money for buying an iPhone, that will be a wasteful expenditure. However, if you're borrowing this money to pay for an MBA program or say for a data science program, this data science program is kind of an investment which will help you in your future. So therefore this is a kind of a capital expenditure where this is a revenue expenditure. The impact of a revenue expenditure will not be huge. In fact, it will be draining, whereas a expenditure on capital will be a fruitful expenditure in a long term horizon. तो long run में आपको फायदा ही देगा, because you will be able to earn more money because of it. So therefore government can run a fiscal deficit, and government can run that fiscal deficit based on borrowings, either because of running a revenue deficit or it can also finance its capital deficit. So ideally what we need is that the government should be running a fiscal deficit and divert that money towards capital expenditure rather than revenue expenditure. So that is a ratio that we need to watch out for. And I have also kept a exercise for you to track this metric and how the government has fared on this metric in the recent times. Then coming to primary deficit. What is this primary deficit? Primary deficit is your fiscal deficit minus your interest payments. Now, suppose I had to borrow those 100 rupees, and of those 100 rupees मैंने ये इसलिए borrow किया because I owed someone interest of 50 rupees. So you can also borrow money in the current year because you want to pay off the interest on the loan that you took in previous years. So पुराने loan का interest चुकाने के लिए आप इस साल borrow कर रहे हो. That could be one of the reasons of borrowing. And if you want to find out what is the fresh borrowings of this current financial year, so you have to remove those interest payments. So from your overall borrowings, if you remove the interest payment due this year, you will get the amount of money that you have borrowed for current financial year, the borrowing for current financial expenditures. That is what we call as primary deficit. That's why the word is primary deficit. So, and again, it follows a similar path of all other examples where because of FRBM, this even went to the negative territory. And now we see that because of COVID, it hit the roof at 5.8%. And in the recent budget, in the budget 2022-23, it has been announced that the government plans to scale it down to 2.8%. Now, the last definition that we have to consider is effective revenue deficit. Now, effective revenue deficit was introduced by Dr. Pranab Mukherjee, and it talks about revenue deficit minus grants to states for capital creation. Now, let's look at it from the structural point of view. Now, if you remember from our structure, our revenue deficit was revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. However, in the term of revenue expenditure, we had talked about one item where the center was giving money to the states, but this money was being utilized by states for capital asset creation. So अगर आप इकोनॉमी की टर्म्स में देखो तो इकोनॉमी में तो कैपिटल एसेट बन रहा है. अगर आपको रेवेन्यू अकाउंट पे ट्रांसफर करना होता है तो आप ट्रांसफर्स टू स्टेट्स में डालते हो पैसा, बट जो सेंटर स्टेट्स को पैसा देता है वो रेवेन्यू अकाउंट के लिए अलग देता है और कैपिटल क्रिएशन के लिए अलग दे रहा है. सो if this item ideally should not be included in revenue deficit, because for a nation as a whole, and even for that, in fact for that particular state, we capital asset creation में पैसा जा रहा है. It no doubt it is coming from center and no doubt it is coming on a recurring basis, but ideally it is creating a capital asset. So Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee had come up with this figure or definition called as effective revenue deficit, where from the revenue deficit you reduce these grants to states for capital creation. तो ये जो grants to states है ये आप remove कर देते हो from revenue deficit and you get what is called as effective revenue deficit. However, but we are not following it up with any targets. So therefore it's just a matter of convention that this is reported. Now the exercise that I have for you is that from RBI's website you have to download this data in an Excel sheet, gross fiscal deficit, or your revenue deficit, your gross primary deficit, the GDP data, and then calculate these ratios and make an Excel file. Now let me show you how do you do that. Now for this you need to go on RBI's website, and on RBI's website there is a tab called Database on Indian Economy. You click on that tab and you will get this database on Indian economy, which is RBI's Data Warehouse. Now, अब इस warehouse के अंदर you go to this tab called statistics. In statistics, you will get different kind of statistics which are available on RBI's website. Now, we want data on fiscal numbers, which will be available on public finance domain. So, public finance में you can go to central government finance, and on central government finance, these figures are reported on an yearly basis as well. So, go to the yearly tab, and from there you can track key deficit indicators of central government. Just click on this and you will get all the figures. It will take a little bit of time to process, and here you have all the deficits available. So can you see till 2021-22 all these deficits are available. It has not been updated with 2022-23 figures, and these are just your budgetary estimates. तो अगर आपको इसमें रिवाइज एस्टिमेट लेना है तो आप बजट के डॉक्यूमेंट से यू कैन पिक अप द रिवाइज एस्टिमेट्स एंड मेक द डॉक्यूमेंट. एंड इफ यू वांट टू डाउनलोड दिस डेटा, ऑल यू नीड टू डू इज क्लिक ऑन दिस बटन and export as Excel, or you can also export it as CSV, whatever you want. तो ये हमारे ये वाले कॉलम्स हो गए जो हमें चाहिए. हमें ग्रॉस फिस्कल डेफिसिट चाहिए, हमें ग्रॉस प्राइमरी डेफिसिट चाहिए, हमें रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट चाहिए. Now you have to represent them as a percentage of GDP. Now you have to ask yourself कि कौन सा GDP? GDP is reported on current basis as well as constant basis. Let's see that. नेशनल इनकम में जाएंगे हम. रियल सेक्टर में नेशनल इनकम में GDP मेंशन होगी. Go to yearly tab, and on yearly tab go to components of GDP at market prices. It will take some time to load, but don't worry, it will load. So here you have, can you see, here you have the components of GDP. What is your GDP? GDP is consumption plus private final consumption expenditure, which is C, plus government final consumption expenditure, which is G, plus your investments, gross capital formation, and then your net exports and imports plus discrepancy, and then you have your GDP at market prices. So you want GDP at market prices. So you can also probably filter this data out. So all you need to do is drill and then filter this data out on the basis of, say, you want to take it item wise, and in terms of item you want GDP at market prices. So आपके पास GDP का data हो गया. Now you can download this entire data set, and it is available from 1950 onwards. So you have everything from 1950 till 2020-21, and you have both current and constant prices. Now you have to understand कि जब हम fiscal deficit के numbers को जब हम कोट करते हैं तो इट इज ऑलवेज करंट प्राइसेस के बेसिस पे कोट करते हैं. व्हाई डू वी बेस इट ऑन करंट प्राइस? क्योंकि हम बोरोइंग भी तो करंट प्राइसेस के हिसाब से कर रहे हैं. अगर हम बोरो करके कहीं स्पेंड करेंगे तो वो भी तो करंट प्राइसेस पे करेंगे. तो जब हम जीडीपी का बेस लेंगे तो दैट जीडीपी का बेस विल ऑल्सो बी ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ द करंट प्राइसेस. सो देयरफॉर you have to take the current prices. You can further drill it down if you want. You can further drill it down to constant or current prices. You pick up current prices and you have this number. Okay, and you just download this entire data and then you can use it wherever you want. So you download this particular data set and then put it in an Excel sheet with the other data set, and then try to find out these ratios. Gross fiscal deficit is there, revenue deficit is there, primary deficit is there. You have this GDP data that is available to you, and then you have to calculate this ratio, gross fiscal deficit as a ratio of GDP, revenue deficit as a fiscal of GDP, primary deficit as a percentage of GDP, and revenue deficit as a percentage of fiscal deficit. So if you see the percentage of revenue deficit as a percentage of fiscal deficit now has been going down, which basically means in this year's budget the government is spending more on capital expenditure rather than revenue expenditure. So this can be seen from this particular data. Now I want you to draw line graphs out of this. How to draw it? Just pick up this particular column, select this particular column simultaneously. So all you can do is Control Shift and down key. You can select this particular column and simultaneously press the control key and keep pressing it, and shift and down you have the year column as well. And now go to insert, and here you can find your line graphs. So if you go to recommended charts, you will be able to find one of the recommendation as line charts. Go to all charts, line charts, and here you can get this particular chart. See? And then you can obviously utilize it in any ways. So this is how the graph that I had shown you in the PPT was basically from 2000 onwards, but here you can see across different years, and this is a historic high that we have reached at the COVID 2020-21 level. So this is how you can draw these graphs. I encourage you to take up this exercise, and with this you can also try different numbers which are available on RBI's website and try to see their trend. So with this this part of the series is over. Now in the next module we'll be talking about what has happened in this year's budget. Thank you very much.